Okay, I don't have a lot of rules for this podcast. In fact, there's pretty much just one. I say, Ginger, Tiffany, our producer, you're just not allowed to book anybody that's hunkier than me. Guess who broke the rule this week, Ginger?
Womp womp. Yeah.
One rule. We had one rule on this show.
You had one job, producer Tiffany, and you actually, I saw him pop up a couple of seconds ago, and I'm a married lady and probably old enough to be his mom. He's fine.
So before, if you're listening to this, you're just going to have to trust Ginger. So we have an Olympian. He is going to the Olympics, but not like your normal. Okay, so by the way, this is Florida's Fourth Estate. I'm Matt Austin. That's Ginger Gadsden. Welcome to the show. We often get diverted.
So excited.
We are excited. So normally an Olympian is someone who has trained from like birth to do, you see these gymnasts, they're like, 12 years old. They're already doing all this crazy stuff. This guy had sort of a roundabout crazy way of making it to the Olympics. His name is Josh Williamson, and we are excited to have him on the podcast. He's a Central Florida guy, played all sorts of sports, and he found his home on the bobsled. Welcome to the show, Josh. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm looking forward to this, and I always, growing up in Central Florida, I watch you all the time, so it's pretty cool to get to have a conversation with y'all.
My man.
Oh, so nice.
That is beautiful.
That was unrehearsed. We didn't even talk about that.
I didn't even make him say that. Look at that.
That is so fantastic. Josh, I just want to say it's always, an honor to talk to. I love athletes because it takes a certain kind of person to achieve that kind of level. But you are Olympic status. When you realize that you were like, okay, I'm on this team, what did you think?
I don't know. It hasn't really set in yet, to be honest. It's been a bit of a surreal experience. We found out here a couple days ago. I've been training the last 4 years. I came in 2017 as they were picking the Olympic team for South Korea. I got to be a part of that process. I wasn't really in the running for anything. I was brand new, so it wasn't like I was really going to make that team, but I got to really watch the process and see some athletes go through it. And now 4 years later, to think I'm in this position, sitting in a holding in California waiting for the
All right. Josh, I think you may have accidentally we may have lost your mic there momentarily. If you possibly have muted yourself. Oh, and he's back.
No, there he is.
All right. But I cannot hear you, Josh. So if you can somehow get your mic back on. It says you muted yourself. Welcome to live streaming. Oh, there you are. We got you back.
You back?
Yes, you're back.
Yeah.
So right now you are in this California facility where they like house all of our super athletes. Tell us about the place you're in right now.
Yeah, no, I'm in Chula Vista, California right now. This is the Olympic Training Center here on the West Coast. I usually live out in Lake Placid, New York, at the Olympic Training Center, and this is just something. Here's one of my teammates, Charlie.
Is there someone swimming behind you right now?
Yeah, that was one of my teammates, Chuck.
What's happening?
But our whole team's here for a holding camp. We're actually just enjoying the warm weather here. I got all the sun on my face, but we've been in the cold weather in Europe pretty much for the last 10 weeks on the road, qualifying for the Olympics, and now we're in a holding camp here. We'll be flying out of Los Angeles with the rest of the Olympic team on the 27th to China. So right now we're just kind of in a quarantine, training here at this facility and getting the sun while we can before we go back to the cold weather.
That is very interesting.
Oh, that's nice. That's going to be great. Okay, so tell me how it is. I was going to ask how someone who played lacrosse ended up on the bobsled.
Well, I played football and lacrosse pretty much growing up my entire life. I played football for the most part and then got into lacrosse in middle school, ended up falling in love with it. And then I ended up stop playing football in high school to continue playing lacrosse. And I ended up going to college to do that. A big goal of mine was to play Division I lacrosse. I ended up going to Mercer University, a small school in South Georgia, right near the kind of Florida border. And went there for a year, had a lot of injuries, and decided just to kind of hang it up. I was kind of sick of being hurt. I kind of achieved that goal, but it wasn't exactly everything I wanted. So I decided to go to Florida State, be a student. I just transferred in, thought I was going to have normal college experience, go be with my friends, good in-state tuition, and just kind of enjoy that part of my life. And it took me about a semester to realize I needed to find something to compete in, and I needed to find another sport to do. And I kept training throughout that time. I just really always enjoyed weightlifting and sprinting and things that kind of kept me ready for bobsled without really training for anything. And when I kind of started looking into maybe some sports that might be an option for me, I followed a couple guys who were on the bobsled team back in 2016, 17. And I just liked a lot of their Instagram videos. They did a lot of heavy weightlifting. They were big guys, strong, fast, and just kind of athletes I wanted to be like. And when I looked a little more into what made them good at bobsled and what it would take to try to get on that team, I wasn't really at those numbers yet, but I thought, maybe with a little training, I thought I could maybe hit some of those benchmarks, and put a couple months of training in and started looking up some combines and where I could maybe get into the sport. And it kind of went from there. I ended up getting in touch with the coaching staff, and the ball kept rolling. And then next thing I knew, I was on the ice.
So Josh, you said you were kind of preparing for this without even know you were preparing for it. You are the brake man on the bobsled. What does that mean? I know that like each bobsled team has like the meaty, strong guy. They've got, like there are different players in this. So what are you, and what is it about your athletic background that helped make you such a good brake man?
It's funny. I say this a lot. I was pretty much training for the sport my whole life without really knowing it. I just was doing the things I enjoyed doing, which for me always was short sprints, jumping, and weightlifting. Those are all things that I naturally liked. I know not a lot of people like distance running. I was particularly bad at it, and it made it just more insult to injury when I'd be like first in the 40-yard sprint, but dead last in the mile. So I hated it even more. In the field sport, you get a lot of conditioning. So I always trained the things I like. It didn't always suit me well for the sports I was in. It did in some instances, but not all the time. And I realized with this sport that I can pretty much train every day and do things that I love pretty much all day. And that's something that really set me up for this. In my position in the bobsled, I right now, we don't exactly know who's going to be racing yet in the 2 and 4 man, but I usually do 2 and 4 man. I push from the left side in the 4 man, which is the guy who ends up sitting right behind the pilot. And the best way to look at it is the brakeman on the back of the 4 man sled, for example. He's going to be on the ice the longest. So you're generally going to have the smaller, very fast guy because you're going 40 meters downhill with a 400-pound sled in front of you. That thing can get moving away from you, and you got to be pretty extremely fast for the back of that. For my position, those positions on the side, you got to be a little more of a mix of strength and speed because you're at a bit of a disadvantaged position to the weight on the sled. So getting it moving is a little harder. When you're behind a lot of weight, for example, you can push it a lot better than if you're on the side of it, and that's something that it requires a little more strength. And the biggest thing for our sport is you're trying to be a perfect mix of size and speed because our sport's a downhill sport. And if you don't have the weight on your body, we have to add weight to the sled. And if we add weight to the sled, that makes our pushing potentially slower because ultimately there's a maximum weight limit that we weigh at the bottom of the track. And you want to be as close to that as you possibly can, or you're at a disadvantage in the race. And the ideal is you have a minimum weight empty sled to push so you can push fast. And then once you all get in, you're heavy enough to get you as close to that maximum weight limit as you can, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like that might be so you have to be heavy, and you have to kind of, you got to be on top of it, right? So you're going like 80 when you're at top speed, is that right?
At the fastest track in the world, which is in Whistler, Canada, like just north of Vancouver, just east of Vancouver, your maximum speed in the 4 man, you're hitting like 95 miles an hour. And that's like fastest track in the world. Generally, you're anywhere from that 80 to 95 area, kind of. And every track's a little different. Turns are different, speeds are a little different, the feeling of the track's different. So it kind of varies, but either way, you're definitely cooking when you get to the bottom of the track with all that weight in those 4 men.
But what does that feel like, Josh, when you're flying that? Are you even aware that you're going that fast, or are you just in that moment in the adrenaline?
In my position at the brakes, your head's down because our whole point is trying to be as aerodynamic as we can once we're in the sled. The pilot will be driving, and the rest of us we go into the wind tunnel over the summer, and we work with a lot of positioning of not only the sled, but ourselves and how we can get the best kind of aerodynamics going around the top of it to hopefully increase our speed. So I don't really get to see how fast we're going, but you can definitely feel it when you're, a big thing that we get is a lot of G forces. We can pull up to 5 Gs in certain parts of the track, and that's because when you're the way we're able to be glued to a wall, going that fast. If you look at a lot of the turns in a bobsled track, they get to the point where it's just flat, and we're kind of glued 4 or 5 feet up. And part of that is because that centrifugal force is pulling us into the turn and holding us to the turn like it would be the ground. So when I'm in a cannonball with my head down, a lot of that force kind of comes down through your neck and kind of pushes you and crunches you down. And that's how you can kind of tell you're like, wow, we are really hauling, because the pressure gets really, really heavy towards the bottom of the track.
That's fascinating. I've always wondered, is the pilot, the one who's steering this thing? I mean, is he actually steering? Is it just taking it where it's going? Or, because, I mean, there's not like wheels on it. What is the steering apparatus inside the bobsled that makes it so the pilot can tell it where to go? Is he having a big impact?
Yes, absolutely. It's always funny. I saw a tweet about this the other day. It's kind of funny. Someone was talking about the idea of like, hey, for a lot of Olympic sport, we should put just somebody who's never done the sport in the event, and just to see what would happen, to give people an idea of what they're watching. Because a lot of times it's sports that nobody's familiar with.
Yeah.
No one has any experience taking a bobsled trip. Our pilots are using essentially 2 D rings. 2 D rings that they pull on. I guess if their hands are like this, right to go right, left to go left, because these ropes attached to an axle that move the front runners. The axle moves, so the runners move when you want to turn, and it's definitely a big impact. For a great way to think of it is if a pilot gets in and sometimes their D rings or their steering is broken or taken from them, it's almost impossible to make it down the track without rolling over, without crashing. So if that tells you a little bit about, they are having a pretty big impact. Not only are we looking for speed, but number one, you want to get down as safe as you can. Sometimes there's a fine line between going fast and being safe, but you kind of straddle that as you get further from learning to drive and closer to wanting to go fast. That's something that you think you start towing that line a little more. But it's definitely a very big impact. What most people are surprised about is our sport. When you think of those blades, they aren't sharp like a skate. They're almost a finger width. They're very fat. And so the idea of that is the thinner the runner that you run, the more ice you're going to cut. So you might have more control, but you might not be as fast. So we run as close to maximum of a radius, which can be almost to a thumb, sorry, I don't know if I'm in the camera here, a thumb's radius almost. And with that, it still digs into the ice because you have, 800 to, you have 600 kilos in the sled, but at the same time, you're trying to cut as little ice as you can. And it's, again, that fine line of, I want to get down safely, but what are ways I can maximize speed? And sometimes that's just letting the sled run. And sometimes the run can get a little rough, but it might be fast.
Yeah. Did you know the first time you were in a bobsled? Do you remember that time? And then after that first ride, did you know right away that I'm going to be back?
It's one of those things where the best way I've heard it described is it's like being in a trash can and just kind of tossed off a ski slope. It's a little jangy, and you're kind of hitting walls, and you're like, everything's rattling. If you're ever at a bobsled race, when you hear a sled coming down the track, it's like a train, and then when it gets close to you, it gets almost deafening, and that's just like a rattling of on and off the ice, of pressures. And it's something that it's very confusing your first time in, especially you don't see where you're going, and you have no idea what to expect, and you get to the bottom, and it's very overwhelming. But I definitely could understand the draw to it. It's one of those things where the more you do it, the less you worry about holding on tight and hoping you don't crash. And then you start feeling the track. And as a brakeman, I start memorizing, okay, turn 1 feels like this. Turn 1 should feel like this. Turn 2 should feel like this. And then, are we having a good run? Are we not? And as you're going down the track, you're a little less worried about, holding on when you become more comfortable and the more trips you take. So I think after my first trip, that was back in 2017 with Nick Cunningham, a multiple-time Olympian for our team, now a coach. He took me down my first run, and it was very overwhelming, but it was something that I definitely was excited for. And there's a lot of aspects about this sport that I love, and I think that was something that I kind of immediately picked up on and got a feeling from the group of guys who were in this sport that I thought I'd fit in well, and that this was something I'd want to continue doing.
I will say, I don't know if you have the best sales pitch I've ever heard for a sport. That's kind of like somebody stuffing you in a trash can and then throwing you down a ski slope. That sounds pretty horrifying.
It's just one of those things. It's funny. Our sport, especially a good run, when you're watching it, it looks very smooth and flowing, and it almost looks like, like the sled's that's just what it does. But if you ever see like a new pilot take a trip down, and if you're ever in a sled, it's very, very rattling, very loud, very rough. You're hitting a wall. So if I'm, folded over, touching my toes in the back of the sled, you hit a wall, then you kind of slam into the side of the sled. And so that's just one of those things that you feel it. And again, it's almost as a brakeman, you get those trips as you move forward in your career. When you start out, I'm not going to be with the best pilot on our team. I'm going to be with the new guy who has never taken a trip, and then your first runs are a little rough. And then you see if you really like it or not, because if you can't get past that, you don't really earn the right to get up and start sliding with the pilots who are going to give you the smoother, faster trips. And so it's kind of that learning curve as you continue in the sport, and you grind it out when you first come in. And then as you get better, if you improve and raise your status on the team, you start to slide with pilots who really have a great feeling for it and can get you some smooth and fast trips.
Wow. Yeah, so it sounds like you get pretty beat up. After a run, are you pretty banged and bruised?
Yeah, runs are generally, that's what I can describe it, is like a minor car crash kind of feeling, where maybe you didn't get hurt and you weren't, nothing serious. And afterwards you have that adrenaline where you feel you're at the bottom and everything feels fine. But then 3 hours later, you're like, man, my neck's kind of sore, and you're kind of like a fender bender kind of feeling. We'll take 2 to 3 trips a day. They last no more than a minute, but they're extremely fatiguing, like neurologically, because it's just, again, you're getting that such heightened sense and that adrenaline state that you get when you take a trip. You get to the bottom and you feel invincible, and then a couple hours later, you're like, man, I need to take a nap. We do that every day, pretty much all winter. And then in the summer, we just train. So summer is sometimes some of the funnest parts of the sport too, is when you're not taking those trips and you can train hard so that in the winter you feel your best and you're almost bulletproofing yourself for those trips and they know what to expect. And the biggest things in our sport are sore necks and backs, and a lot of foggy heads. You're hitting your head a little bit and just kind of protecting yourself. We have our protective equipment. I'll explain that is a motorcycle helmet, essentially. And we have a burn vest that are also used in motorcycles generally, because if you were to crash, it's surprising to a lot of people, but because you're on ice, that friction, it almost gets to the point where it feels hot on your back and you can potentially get a pretty bad burn on your back. And so we wear Kevlar vests underneath our speed suits, just in the chance that you crash, that you protect yourself from that. And that's what the helmet's there for as well.
Have you been in some nasty spills in practice, Josh? Have you felt the wrath of the motorcycle crash on the ice?
Yes, I definitely have. That's just kind of a part of our sport. When you're trying to go fast, you push the limit, and sometimes you roll over, and that's what happens. Sometimes sleds just break. I've had a pilot get in, and one of his D-rings is just gone, like it just got ripped off. So all he can do is turn left. So what are you gonna do? But and then,
it's not NASCAR.
Or right, exactly. Or you get in the sled, and just some tracks are difficult. And you're looking for speed, and your pilot pushes it just like you'd want him to, and you roll over. I've had a couple crashes in a couple World Cup races and training. Some crashes are worse than others. So it's just one of those things. It's luck of the draw, and it's really out of your control. So at the same time, it's funny that there's almost a sense of peace in it. It's like I get in the sled and you're in this uncomfortable environment, but in a weird way, it's always been a little relaxing to me, because it's one of those things where there's not a lot you can do, and you can either kind of freak out and worry about that, or you can just kind of smile and be like, you know what, I'm in for the ride, and at this point, I'm just going to hold on tight and get as low as I can, and hopefully we go fast, and hopefully we stay on all 4 runners.
It is incredible, because it sounds like you could also go to space when you talk about pulling the 5 Gs. How far in advance do you eat before you have an event? Because it sounds like things could get kind of hairy in that rattling trash can if you don't time it right.
Yes, absolutely. And I eat a couple hours before, it's something that, again, and as you get more trips, it's a little more comfortable. We have some people who their first year or so, they have to take Dramamine when they slide. That's just, some people can get motion sickness. I've never really had that issue, but that's just kind of, some people, you got to get used to it. And some people, I've known people who have never not gotten sick being in sleds, but they continued because they wanted to do this sport and there was a lot they liked about it. But that minute of sliding wasn't always the best for them, but at the end of the day, and our 5Gs that we might potentially pull in some turns, it's very, the way to best describe it is it's spiked pressure. If you have like a fighter pilot who's going to pull that many Gs, they're getting sustained pressure, and that's some of the hardest part, right? Is they're pulling that amount of Gs, but it's continuous. For us, it's like I'm in and out of a turn in, a couple seconds, and I might get that 5G spike for 0.3 of a second. So I'm going, I get one big pull down, and then I kind of let up, and you get into a next turn, and then you get some pressure, and then you're on the flat and you lose that pressure. So it's a little bit of it's a kind of a dance with gravity that our sleds are doing, and it's one of those things that you're just navigating. The best way I've heard my pilot Hunter describe it is you're navigating the sled down, but you're almost dealing with what nature's giving you in that, right? What gravity's giving you and what those forces are giving you. Because sometimes if you try to fight what the sled wants to do too much, the sled's going to win every time. If it wants to go up and you're trying to get it to get off and you fight too much and you build more pressure, you're going to spit out the end of it. So it's just kind of that dance of having that feel of where the sled is and what the sled wants to do. And if that's what you want it to do, getting it down as fast as you can.
Very cool. So we've got a Lake Mary kid. If you're a Central Floridian and you're going to watch the Winter Olympics and you want to watch somebody who's local, who's doing the freaking thing, you've got Josh, the brakeman on the U.S. Olympic bobsled team. And what was it like growing up at Lake Mary? Before I let you go, I mean, you're a Central Florida guy. Central Florida guys don't normally end up on the bobsled team. You're like, I mean, there's the Jamaican bobsled team, which is a big story. And then there's the Central Florida bobsled team, which is equally as just ridiculous. So what was it like?
How many times have you watched Cool Running?
I've seen it once or twice. We get that one a lot, and that's one that it's really cool. The Jamaican bobsled team actually just qualified for their first four-man since the Nagano Olympics in 1998, which is really cool and awesome for them. Those guys are constantly kind of grinding it out, and it's really cool to see that happen and to be able to go compete with them in Beijing. Growing up in Lake Mary, to answer your question, Matt, I couldn't have asked for a better place to live, frankly. I tell people all the time, that Central Florida and just Florida in general, I don't know if there's any other place I'd want to live in the world. I enjoy going out and seeing the winter weather. It's still kind of novel to me. So even though it's really cold, I enjoy it still. But right now being in the sun in Chula Vista here is just kind of making me homesick in a weird way, because I just want to be back in New Smyrna, kind of back in Orlando and just relaxing a little bit. And I can't wait to get back after the season, because I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. New Smyrna Beach is my favorite place on the planet. There's nowhere I'd rather live in this world than the state of Florida, to be honest.
That's what we like to hear, isn't it, Gigi?
Yeah, that is fantastic. Well, once you get the gold, I'm just going to claim it for you. Please come by and see us. We'd still love to talk to you again after it's all said and done with, and we have a gold medal Olympian in our. We'd love to see you. It's just been fascinating talking to you and just hearing the mechanics of it all, because I don't think a lot of people understand how that fight works. And people commenting or saying they're so proud of you, especially the people who are from Central Florida. We're proud of you too. So great job.
Thank you guys so much for having me. This was a lot of fun. And again, it's just kind of been a surreal experience, like being named my first Olympic team and getting to talk to you guys and just this whole process and all the support I've gotten from Central Florida. It's been overwhelming in the best way, I guess.
Hey, we'll all be watching. We'll all be cheering for you, Josh. Bring that gold medal home after the fact. Yes. We'll have a little mini parade here on Florida's 4th Estate. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have another one for you next week. Good luck, Josh. Go crush it.
Yes.
Thank you, guys.